The courtroom was packed. Cameras hummed quietly from the back wall, reporters scribbled furiously, and every spectator knew this wasn't just another pre-trial hearing. This was Bondi versus the department, a case already making headlines before it ever saw a jury. Judge Andrew H. Stone, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and rigid procedural discipline, adjusted his glasses and tapped the bench. Ms. Bondi, we've reviewed your motion to suppress the newly submitted evidence. Based on the case record and procedural history, the court finds no merit in the motion. It is denied. A murmur rolled through the room. Bondi didn't flinch. The former prosecutor turned federal litigator stood calmly, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her expression unreadable. With all due respect, Your Honor, she said, reaching into her leather binder, there's one sentence, just one, you may have overlooked. Stone gave her a measured glance. Proceed. She held up a single sheet of paper. This was filed in the supplemental disclosure packet sent by the department's own counsel, time-stamped 2 minutes before the cutoff. And right here, line 14, paragraph 3, is a direct contradiction to their sworn affidavit. The courtroom stilled. Judge Stone narrowed his eyes. Approached the bench. Pam did, steady, calm, as if she'd planned for this exact moment. As she handed over the paper, she said only one sentence aloud. Just one. And when she did, the room went silent. Pam's voice was clear, sharp as glass. And under no circumstances did Agent Mendez enter the property prior to the signed warrant being issued. A beat of silence followed. Judge Stone blinked, staring down at the document in his hands. He read the line again. Then again. Slowly, his face changed. Pam Bondi stepped back, returning to her table, but the impact of her words still echoed like a dropped gavel. The prosecution's team looked visibly shaken, whispering among themselves. Stone leaned forward, speaking low but firm. Ms. Cartwright, he addressed the government's lead attorney. Is this your team's document? Cartwright stood, her voice noticeably tighter than before. Yes, Your Honor. That was part of the supplemental disclosure we provided during discovery. He tapped the paper twice. Then explain to this court, he said slowly, how Agent Mendez's bodycam footage, time-stamped 47 minutes before the warrant was approved, aligns with this sworn statement. You could have heard a pin drop. Cartwright hesitated. Your Honor, we were told the footage was mislabeled. That it was logged incorrectly. Pam didn't even turn to look at her. She simply opened another folder, waiting. Stone didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. But what he said next cut deeper than any outburst. This court takes false declarations very seriously, Counselor. We are now dealing with a potential violation of due process, possibly more. Someone in the back coughed. The air had turned electric. Pam calmly added, there's more than just that line, Your Honor. But I figured we'd start with the sentence that unraveled their entire timeline. Judge Stone removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. This hearing is now in recess. Both sides are to reconvene in chambers. Immediately. The gavel struck. And with that, the courtroom erupted, but Pam Bondi never moved. She had already won the moment. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with tension. Reporters rushed to get the first words out, their phones raised like weapons. But behind the heavy oak doors of Judge Stone's chambers, the tone was completely different, sharp, cold, and controlled. Pam Bondi stood with quiet authority on one side of the long-polished conference table. On the other, Assistant U.S. Attorney Cartwright sat beside two visibly nervous DOJ aides. Judge Stone remained at the head, jaw clenched, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Let me make this very clear, he began. This is not just about a procedural error. What Ms. Bondi just presented calls into question the credibility of sworn testimony submitted by your office. Cartwright spoke carefully. Your Honor, I assure you, there was no intent to mislead the court. The timeline confusion may have come from a clerical issue at the evidence lab, Pam finally spoke, voice measured and unshaken. Then how do you explain the agent's handwritten notes? The ones where he describes details of the interior before the time the warrant was officially granted? That's not a clerical issue. That's a constitutional one. She slid a second document across the table. Another nail in the coffin. Judge Stone picked it up, eyes scanning quickly. He paused halfway, then looked directly at Cartwright. You understand this could constitute an unlawful entry, he said. Which means any evidence obtained afterward may be tainted, inadmissible. Cartwright looked pale. Pam leaned in slightly, calm and surgical. Your Honor, I move not only to suppress the evidence, but to initiate an evidentiary hearing into potential misconduct by the agents involved. Stone stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Motion granted. The hearing will be scheduled. And Ms. Cartwright, get ready to answer under oath. As the chambers fell silent, Cartwright sank back in her chair. Pam simply closed her folder. Another battle had begun, but this time, the courtroom wasn't on the government's side. By the time Pam Bondi stepped back into the courthouse lobby, her phone was vibrating non-stop. Calls, texts, media requests, they were all flooding in. She ignored them. Outside, a wall of cameras and microphones waited, but Pam didn't stop to speak. Her work wasn't for headlines, it was for the record. And the record now showed the government had a serious credibility problem. Back upstairs, Judge Stone moved swiftly. The hearing was fast-tracked to the following week. A rare move, one that signaled just how seriously he was taking Pam's findings. Behind closed doors, agents who once held themselves above scrutiny were now being summoned with subpoenas. Internal Affairs had launched a preliminary inquiry. And whispers inside the DOJ hinted that someone might take the fall. Meanwhile, Pam returned to her office. Her team, 2 assistants and a paralegal, were already compiling surveillance logs, metadata timelines, and prior case law. Pull US v. Leon and Franks versus Delaware, she said, dropping her briefcase on the table. If they're going to argue good faith, we'll be ready. One of her aides hesitated. Do you think they'll settle? Pam didn't even look up. They'll try. But not until they realize how deep this goes. She walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. For a brief moment, her face softened. This isn't just about one case, she said quietly. It's about holding them accountable when they think no one's looking. Then she turned back, and the softness vanished. Get me every document signed by Agent Mendez in the last 2 years. If he lied once, he's lied before. The room moved into action. Pam Bondi wasn't done. She was just getting started. The morning of the evidentiary hearing arrived like a storm. Pam Bondi walked through the courthouse metal detectors without saying a word. Her team followed close behind, carrying sleek black binders, 3 large evidence boxes, and a quiet confidence that rattled even the bailiffs. In courtroom 5B, the seats were filled before the hour. News anchors whispered to camera crews. DOJ officials avoided eye contact with one another. And Judge Stone sat taller than usual, the weight of the moment carved into his expression. All rise, the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. Pam's presence was commanding, sharp blazer, tightly bound notes, and an air that said she already knew how this would end. Call your first witness, Judge Stone ordered. Cartwright stood. The government calls Special Agent Mendez. Mendez took the stand, clearly rehearsed but sweating. The oath was administered, and Cartwright began gently, trying to reframe the narrative. Pam watched, silent. She knew exactly when to strike. When her turn came, she approached slowly, then launched her first question like a blade. Agent Mendez, what time did you arrive at the Bondi property? Approximately 7:15 a.m. Pam nodded. And the signed warrant, when was that received? 7:54 a.m. She paced, then asked, "So for nearly 40 minutes, you were, where exactly?" Mendez shifted. "Waiting outside. On the perimeter." Pam clicked a remote. The courtroom projector lit up, displaying a still image, taken from Mendez's own Bodycam. The timestamp read 7:23 a.m. In the photo, his boots were clearly inside the house. His hand was reaching for a kitchen drawer. Gasps spread across the room. Pam's voice didn't waver. "Is this you inside the residence?" "Yes." "And is this before or after the signed warrant?" "Before." She let the silence settle. Then, calmly, "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Stone leaned forward, his tone heavier than before. "This court has just witnessed a direct contradiction between sworn testimony and recorded evidence. The implications are grave." Pam returned to her seat, her eyes fixed ahead. One sentence had started this. Now, a single image might finish it. Judge Stone's gavel struck once, sharp and final. "This court will recess for 30 minutes, he announced. "During that time, I expect government counsel to confer with their supervisory attorneys. We will reconvene for a formal ruling on the admissibility of all contested evidence." The courtroom emptied in a slow, stunned silence. Outside, reporters scrambled like bees. Inside, Pam Bondi remained seated, still and unreadable, while her team reviewed the next exhibits. Her calm wasn't arrogance, it was preparation. She didn't believe in courtroom miracles. She believed in facts, timing, and the power of catching someone in a lie while the cameras were still rolling. Across the aisle, Cartwright and her DOJ aides were in quiet chaos. Two of them left the room clutching phones to their ears. One whispered something about damage control and possible sanctions. Pam leaned to her paralegal. "Make sure the press gets a copy of Exhibit 17 after the ruling. Let the evidence speak for itself." At exactly 11:30 a.m., the court reconvened. Judge Stone entered with a folder in hand, no computer, no aide, no notes. Just a ruling. He didn't waste a second. After reviewing the submitted exhibits, including the time-stamped Bodycam footage and Agent Mendez's conflicting testimony, this court finds that a material violation of Fourth Amendment protections has occurred. The audience froze. The entry was made without judicial authorization. As such, all evidence gathered during that unlawful entry is hereby suppressed. Furthermore, this court is forwarding the matter to the Department's Office of Inspector General for review of agent conduct. Pam stayed still, her expression unreadable. But her fingers curled slightly, just once, into a quiet fist of triumph. Judge Stone wasn't finished. The prosecution will proceed without the suppressed materials. If the government is unable to continue, the case may be subject to dismissal upon motion. Cartwright barely nodded, her voice thin. "We understand, Your Honor." As the gavel fell again, the courtroom exploded into motion. And yet, amid the swirl of chaos, Pam Bondi stood alone, quiet, composed, victorious, not because she had shouted louder, but because she had read one sentence that no one dared challenge. The media reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Headlines splashed across every outlet within hours: Pam Bondi exposes DOJ misstep, judge slams federal entry as unconstitutional, one sentence, one photo, how Bondi shattered the government's case in a single morning. Cable news panels buzzed with debate. Legal analysts praised her precision. Some speculated this ruling might trigger a wider review of similar cases involving Agent Mendez, or worse, a pattern. Pam didn't comment. She didn't have to. Back at her office, her team worked late into the night, compiling a public report of everything that had just transpired in court. Not for the cameras, but for the record. "Any word from DOJ?" her assistant asked. "They sent over a settlement proposal," Pam said coolly, not even glancing up from her laptop. "They want to end it quietly. No hearing. No headlines. Her paralegal raised an eyebrow. You going to take it? Pam looked up now, and her eyes were steel. Absolutely not. She stood and walked to the whiteboard filled with timelines, agent statements, and forensic gaps. This isn't just about suppression. This is about accountability. They think they can break protocol and just offer a check later. I'm not here for a payout. I'm here to finish what we started. At that moment, her phone buzzed again. Another reporter. She ignored it. Instead, she pointed to the top corner of the board where 3 names were written: Mendez, Cartwright, and Supervising Agent Torres. Next hearing, she said, we pull Torres into testimony. If he signed off on Mendez's actions, that means this went higher than just one agent. Her team nodded. Pam stepped back, taking one last look at the whiteboard. This wasn't a mistake, she said. This was a pattern. And now, they've got a problem. The next hearing was unlike the others. Federal marshals stood at the back of the courtroom, not just for show. Tensions were high, and everyone knew it. This wasn't just about a single illegal entry anymore. It was about exposing whether that entry was part of a broader, deliberate tactic quietly used across multiple cases. Pam Bondi sat ready. Her team had filed a motion to compel testimony from Supervising Agent Luis Torres, a 20-year veteran known for staying out of the spotlight. That changed today. Torres took the stand under subpoena. His posture was rigid. His jaw tight. He clearly didn't want to be there, but Bondi made sure he had no choice. She stood slowly, papers in hand, and addressed him directly. Agent Torres, according to these internal memos, you approved Mendez's warrant application. Yes. You also reviewed his field notes, correct? I did. She nodded, then walked a few steps closer. In those notes, Agent Mendez mentions observing items inside the residence at 7:25 a.m. You still signed off on the affidavit stating no agents entered the property before 7:54 a.m. Torres hesitated. I believe the time logs were incorrect. A syncing error with the devices, maybe. Pam didn't blink. But you never verified those logs with the Bodycam metadata, did you? Silence. You never pulled the footage yourself, even though you were the supervisor assigned to the operation. True. Yes. Pam turned to Judge Stone. Your Honor, we submit this as Exhibit 19. Internal policy from the Bureau, requiring all supervising agents to personally verify time-sensitive entries before approving affidavits tied to federal warrants. She handed it to the bailiff. Signed by Torres himself, 2 years ago. The courtroom tensed. Judge Stone glanced over the policy. His brow furrowed. Agent Torres, he said slowly, did you violate your own written directive? Torres cleared his throat. I did not intentionally. That's a yes or no, Agent. A long pause. Yes. Pam stepped back, letting the admission hang like thunder. For the second time in 2 weeks, a federal official had publicly contradicted their own record, under oath. Pam didn't look triumphant. She looked relentless. Because this wasn't about catching a mistake. It was about finally proving the system had stopped caring about rules, until someone forced it to remember. The courtroom was frozen. Agent Torres sat slumped in the witness chair, a man undone not by an attack, but by his own admission. Judge Stone leaned back slowly, the silence pressing like a weight across the gallery. Then, in a tone both restrained and unmistakably firm, he spoke, this court will be issuing a formal referral to the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility for Agent Torres's conduct, along with a transcript of today's testimony. Gasps rippled through the back row. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the clerks looked up from their screens. Pam Bondi didn't smile. She never did in moments like this. She just opened the next folder. Your Honor, she said clearly, we now request that all other cases tied to Agent Torres's supervisory review be re-evaluated. There are at least 14 within this district, and potentially dozens more statewide. This isn't just a one-off error, it's systemic. Judge Stone gave a small nod, not of approval but understanding. Ms. Bondi, file the motion. I'll authorize preliminary review. Cartwright, representing the DOJ, finally stood, but her earlier confidence was long gone. Your Honor, may I approach the bench privately? Stone didn't hesitate. Denied. You'll speak where everyone can hear you. Cartwright straightened, then offered what everyone had been expecting. The government is prepared to dismiss the current charges and is open to discussions regarding relief or remedies appropriate to the defendant. In other words, they were folding. Pam raised one eyebrow. We're not done yet. Stone turned to her. Ms. Bondi, you'll file your remedy recommendations by end of week? She nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. The gavel fell again. As everyone stood, one reporter whispered to another, she just tore down a whole branch of the DOJ with a single sentence. But Pam was already walking out the side door. Because the courtroom may have been quiet now. But the reckoning had just begun. 3 days later, Washington called. Pam Bondi was in her office reviewing newly unsealed records when her assistant knocked and mouthed, DOJ, Internal Affairs. She picked up the line without pause. This is Bondi. A calm, clipped voice responded. Ms. Bondi, I'm calling on behalf of Deputy Director Chambers. We'd like to speak with you directly, off the record, regarding supervisory breakdowns in the Mendez-Torres investigations. Pam leaned back in her chair. If it's off the record, I don't see the point. The caller hesitated. We're considering opening a task force. Clean up. But if the scope expands, we're going to need someone with experience. Someone who's already cracked it open. Pam's eyes narrowed. You want my cooperation. We want your leadership. She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze drifted to the stack of files still waiting on her desk, cases that hadn't made headlines yet. Names of defendants who hadn't had anyone reading the fine print for them. I'm not interested in making this quiet, she said finally. If this becomes a behind-closed-doors patch job, don't waste my time. There was a pause on the other end. We understand. When the call ended, Pam stood and walked to the whiteboard. Next to Agent Torres's name, she wrote 2 new names, both supervisors from a different district, but flagged in the same files Torres had signed off on. Patterns were emerging. And this time, they wouldn't stop at one courtroom. Pam turned to her team. Prepare a federal oversight petition. We're going higher. One of her aides blinked. Higher than the district courts. She nodded. Capitol Hill. Pam knew exactly what she was walking into, a firestorm of political pressure, bureaucratic resistance, and federal blowback. But for the first time in years, the system wasn't just bending. It was breaking. And she wasn't done. Not until every false warrant, every illegal entry, every silent cover-up was dragged into the light, one sentence at a time. 3 months later, Pam Bondi stood before the House Subcommittee on Legal Oversight in a packed congressional hearing room. Cameras rolled. Flashbulbs popped. Members of Congress sat shoulder to shoulder along the dais, flipping through thick briefing folders filled with her findings. She'd submitted a 174-page report. It chronicled patterns of warrant mismanagement, coordinated affidavit contradictions, and supervisory failures not just in one case, but in dozens. Names redacted, dates highlighted, timestamps logged to the second. But her opening statement didn't rely on numbers. It relied on the same precision that had shut down a courtroom months earlier. I'm not here because of a personal vendetta. I'm here because the system we trusted to uphold the law started believing it was above it. When agents act outside constitutional boundaries, and supervisors sign off without review, the result isn't just a technical error. It's a betrayal. She paused, letting the words settle like dust in a vault. Some will say this is isolated. A mistake. But the evidence shows a pattern of indifference. And indifference erodes justice far faster than intent ever could. The room was silent. Even the most partisan members didn't interrupt. By the end of the session, the committee voted unanimously to recommend a full DOJ audit into pre-warrant enforcement practices nationwide. Several agents quietly resigned. Others were reassigned pending investigation. And Bondi? She didn't stay to celebrate. She walked out of that room the same way she walked out of that courtroom, quiet, deliberate, resolute. That single sentence she read in court months ago hadn't just suppressed a piece of evidence. It had ignited a reckoning. And Pam Bondi never wanted fame. She wanted truth. And when the system forgot what that looked like, she reminded it.